Welcome to the Zone. In today's episode, we'll be covering my top 5 worst ways to die in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. While this list is not objectively the worst ways, as worse is a subjective thing to most people, they are certainly above and beyond what the majority of people would consider a horrible death. Feel free to drop a comment below and let me know what you think are the most horrible ways to die in the zone. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like and subscribe for more Stalker-related content. If you'd like to support the channel financially, check out my Patreon and merch store links in the description below. Without further ado, let's dive in. There are certainly more than enough deadly mutants in the zone that will completely rip a person to shreds. You could be pounced upon by a deadly chimera and never even hear the cause of your death before it's too late. You could be crushed to death by a behemoth pseudo-giant as it charges you down and begins to pound you into a sludge on the ground. Poor stalkers have been ripped apart by wild dogs, stalked and hunted by packs of snorks, and even psychically assaulted by controllers. But the most terrifying mutant to have hunting you is certainly the Bloodsucker. Even if these camouflaged creatures will sometimes kill you outright from the strength and the ferocity of their attacks, those who are unlucky will simply be knocked out by their invisible attacker. These poor souls will find themselves slowly regaining consciousness as they are dragged into an underground lair, away from any help or prying eyes. Eventually, they will realize that they are trapped in a nest, next to other victims of these monstrous creatures. Trapped and unable to move, drifting in and out of consciousness from the massive blow to the head, they will scream in terror as bloodsuckers periodically come to feed on their victims. The victim may struggle, attempting to break loose and escape the dark, damp feeding ground, but their fate is sealed. Within moments, the victim's blood will be drained from their body as they twitch and struggle in one last feeble attempt to fight back. Or a much worse fate may befall them as they are slowly drained over multiple feedings. Becoming the rumored food reserve for a bloodsucker nest is the first on my list simply because of how powerless and outmatched you are. Becoming food for a nest of hungry bloodsuckers is going to be terrifying. As they drag you back to the nest, you'll be disoriented and in pain due to the initial attack from the bloodsucker that was able to assault you. You'll have very few options as you're dragged into the lair. Even if you manage to pull a weapon and attempt to fight your way out, there will certainly be more bloodsuckers than you can handle. Your best option is to simply pray for a quick death. All across the zone, there are obstacles in a stalker's path. These can take the form of other people attempting to kill you, mutants attempting to eat you, or the zone itself taking its natural toll on your body. While there are certainly more than enough deadly anomalies scattered throughout the zone to kill you in a dozen different ways, the radiation makes for a particularly horrible way to die. Many novice stalkers will make their way into the zone, attempting to find riches and adventure, and most of these men are completely unprepared for the realities of the zone. While there are some of these stalkers who will have a few doses of anti-radiation medicine or a few bottles of vodka to stave off the effects of minor radiation sickness, there are very few who will have any kind of physical protection. There are parts of the zone that are naturally radioactive due to the disaster at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, where a nuclear reactor melted down. But there are also areas throughout the zone that are radioactive for seemingly no reason at all. These massive spikes in radioactive activity are localized, sometimes confined to a small area, no bigger than a car or an old house. Regardless of what causes this radioactive activity, it is sure to claim the lives of ill-equipped stalkers. Being exposed to a massive spike of radiation while unprotected is sure to kill you painfully, but it can take hours or days before your symptoms are even noticed. Without tools like a Geiger counter, a stalker could unknowingly walk near lethal levels of this odd radiation without even knowing it, only to be puking blood and writhing in pain a day later, seemingly without a cause. Even a stalker who may know how to avoid radioactive areas will be hard-pressed to avoid radiation sickness. In some areas of the zone, there is still radioactive material in the dirt and dust, which will be kicked up from walking, shooting, and sometimes the simple wind. This dust can be almost invisible to the naked eye, as its small particles are spread all around the stalker, landing on their clothing, their skin, and if they don't have a method of air filtration, into their lungs. While a short exposure to this type of radiation is not fatal by any means, prolonged exposure to it certainly is. Without changing their coat and washing their skin frequently, stalkers will begin to feel off after a few weeks. They'll have frequent bouts of nausea and diarrhea. They may notice rashes breaking out on their exposed skin. Frequent headaches and disorientation will plague them. As the sickness progresses, they'll soon start to see hair and possibly even teeth begin to fall out. For me, radiation sickness has always been a terrifying thing, especially acute radiation poisoning. Receiving a large dose of radiation from these highly radioactive areas would be terrible, mainly because, when you see symptoms, you know your fate is sealed. You will die a painful and horrible death, and there's no possible way to get significant medical treatment, unless you are military personnel or really lucky. Imagining myself writhing in pain on the ground in Pripyat as I ponder about how screwed I am is not a pleasant thing. One of the most common anomalies that stalkers will encounter in underground areas across the zone. The fruit punch is as terrifying as it is common. These highly caustic pools of green ooze have been known to completely dissolve any object that falls into them, including body parts. While the most common encounter with a fruit punch comes in the form of a slight misstep, resulting in portions of a stalker's boot or sometimes even feet being eaten away, a far more horrifying thing is a full submersion into the pool. Slipping and falling directly into a fruit punch would result in a death that would be a baptism of pain and untold suffering. Falling head first into this anomaly would offer a quick enough death as your face dripped off of your dissolving skull. But a partial dip into one of these glowing pools would be a much worse fate. Falling waist deep into one of these bubbling and churning pools would result in your legs being eaten by caustic fluids. As you pulled yourself away from the anomaly, you would begin to feel your legs fall under you, as your quads become too damaged from the acid to function. You would begin to crawl away, attempting to find help or shelter, as your flesh began to drip off of what was once called your legs, leaving a bloody and smoking trail of ooze behind you, like a snail or a slug. The pain would be unimaginable, as the chemical burns ate away at your nerves, until finally, the pain subsides as your pain receptors have been burnt away. You would look at the raw stubs now protruding from your abdomen in horror, as you realized your legs were completely dissolved, and were now small chunks of smoking meat and sludge smeared across the ground behind you. You would surely die from infection soon after, if a mutant or person didn't get you first. Having part of your body completely removed while being in agonizing physical pain is bad enough, but for me, the sheer psychological damage that this type of injury would inflict would be too much to bear for most people. While going in head first would surely be a very painful experience, it would at least be quick, assuming that you were exposed long enough to not just melt off your eyes, face, and hair. I personally think that this has to be easily one of the worst ways to die in the zone, regardless of which way you slice it. One of the more curious and slow ways to die in the zone certainly belongs to the space anomaly. Particular types of space anomalies do not simply transport their victim to a different location across space and time, but rather, they transport them to a different dimension. This dimension looks very similar to ours, however, it has different rules of physics. A stalker who unknowingly enters this anomaly would in a flash of light be transported to a place that looked rather familiar at first. They would simply chalk this up to being a form of teleporter anomaly, like the ones they've heard so much about. They'd become excited at the prospect of discovering some new previously unknown secret of the zone. They would begin to explore their new environment, looking for any interesting artifacts or items that may make them rich beyond their wildest dreams. They would soon become perplexed, however, as no matter how far they walked away from their entry point, they would always end up back where they started. They would take different routes away from their arrival point, until eventually discovering dead bodies of other stalkers who had come here before them. Horror would soon set in, as they saw the emaciated bodies of fallen men who starved to death, attempting their escape. They would also find those who chose a much quicker way out, as they discovered bodies of stalkers who laid on the ground, with a pistol in their hands and blood sprayed across the walls. This place was no blessing, but a curse, and there is no escape. Regardless of how it happens, the stalker will soon realize that they're not getting lost and doubling back on themselves, but rather, they're being teleported to the center of this horrible place. As the days draw on and the stalker drinks the last of their water from their canteen, they would realize they only have a few days left. With no hope of finding food, water, or rescue, insanity would soon set in. The only way out of this place is a long, slow death by hunger or thirst, or by a bullet. While there are stalkers who have made it out of these traps, they are few and far between. For me, this would be horrible, as it is not a death by the environment or an enemy, but a slow, downhill battle against hunger and simple psychology. It's a battle that you will lose one way or another, and you have the bodies of other victims next to you, constantly reminding you of your inevitable fate. The last horrible way to die on my list is probably one of the worst in my opinion, worse than the ones mentioned above. Although magnificent to behold, the awe-inspiring power of these storms is as insidious as it is beautiful. While out and exploring the zone, these storms can come at any time. While they are able to be predicted with some measure of accuracy by scientists, they can also be triggered by seemingly random events. For instance, when a stalker gets a little too close to a protected area. When these massive storms envelop the zone, any human caught without proper protection or shelter will begin to feel their head swell, giving them the worst migraine that they've ever experienced. The pain will intensify to the point where the stalker is forced to the ground, clutching at their head in an attempt to do anything they can to cope with the pain. As the storm progresses, the stalker may hear otherworldly sounds or see vague hallucinations, which also intensify as the storm goes on. Finally, the stalker will black out and remain unconscious for some time. Upon awakening, the victim will begin to shamble, muttering incoherent sentences about escaping the zone or perhaps meeting a loved one. The now zombified stalker will roam the zone, searching for other zombies. As the days go on, the zombie will unknowingly be directed by the Psi consciousness to patrol areas or hunt targeted stalkers. Occasionally, the zombie may realize what they are, seemingly coming out of their dream state, crying out for a short while before being brought back under control of the Psi consciousness. As time goes on, the zombie will begin to decay as their brain functionality deteriorates until they finally die. Becoming a zombified stalker is terrifying for many reasons, but mainly because the tiniest bit of self-awareness the zombies still seem to have. If you watch the short translation video that Stalker Info has done on zombified stalkers, you can see how terrible of a fate this truly is. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, feel free to like and subscribe for more stalker-related content. If you'd like to help support the channel financially, check out my Patreon link in the description below. This video is made possible by patrons like you: Chernobyl Wolf, Arch, Dylan, Templar, Hygie, Stingray, Radio Guy, X51, Fire545, Dalton, and Koryun. Until next time, guys, I'll see you in the zone.